It's all good, yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion. I'm very excited to see all of you here today. We've got a very interesting topic to talk about. It's about distributed ledgers not on the blockchain. You know, the conference is called Blockchain International Scientific Conference, but today we cover DLTs which are not on the blockchain. We cover new emerging technologies. We cover the limitations of smart contracts. So we really talk about the next steps in our industry. And before I want to ask Alex Jens to introduce herself, a few words on myself. So my name is Susanne. I am the CEO and founder of Fintech Circle. We invest in fintech startups. We've got an angel network where we invest in early stage fintech companies. We also write books on fintech. So the first book was called The Fintech Book, quite simply, which we published with Wiley 2 years ago, and it became a global bestseller. And since then we published 2 more books. One is on wealth tech and one is on insurtech. And we also work with banks and advise banks how to innovate, you know, how to lead to more transformative services, how to use blockchain as well. And often in banks it's still early days, to be honest. I think they're still, you know, checking out the technology, learning about it, and I don't see very strong use cases emerging yet. I think we're at the beginning of this journey. So very excited to be here, and we've got a wonderful panel here with us. So I would like now to introduce to Jens and Alex to introduce yourself, please.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Nice meeting you all. My name is Jens Munk, and I'm Danish, as the name and the accent says, but I live in London. I'm part of the IOTA Foundation, and just two words about the IOTA Foundation. The IOTA Foundation is the custodian, I would say, of the IOTA technology, the Tangle, which is a non-blockchain distributed ledger technology, and I guess that's why I'm part of this panel. The role, so just to say a little bit about the setup of the foundation. The foundation is really, we are around 100 people in the foundation, and we issue open code, and there's open access to the technology and so on, and we are registered in Germany as a non-for-profit organization. What I find interesting is that we have around 70,000 followers that contribute to the technology, building this ecosystem. We're still in early days in building this ecosystem, but it's a very exciting journey we are on. And myself, I'm a technologist. I have to learn a lot. I come from shipping. I come from supply chain management. And when you say banking is the early days, still feel other industries are as well. So I've been part of Maersk for many years before I moved into the IOTA Foundation, and my role is trying to be the translator between the technology and the use cases and help that flotation happening between the technology and companies. So pleasure being here.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, please, Alex.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? Yeah, still awake? Okay, great. So my name is Alex Fazell. I'm head of communication at SwissBorg. We're a next generation crypto investment platform that's entirely based on the community. And so the reason why I'm here today is I was in charge of looking at liquidity aggregation and API connectors with the different crypto exchanges. So as you may know, crypto exchanges use off-chain technology. And we've been preaching this from the very beginning, from 2017. We've always been the balance between the off-chain and on-chain worlds, because we believe that you could be a Bitcoin maximalist or an evangelist, but you gotta look at what has happened in the past, look at the traces that were successful, rather than just focusing on what is successful on the on-chain world. So non-blockchain technologies are things that we look into as well. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, Alex, thank you very much. And I think, so maybe to start out very simple, for all of us, maybe Jens, if I can ask you first, our topic is non-blockchain DLTs. What does it actually mean? Can you define it in simple words? What is a DLT which is not on the blockchain?
So distributed ledger technology is the fact that it's distributed. I think I would say that I know you're going to talk a little bit more about the decentralized things, but if you talk about IOTA as such, it's very different from the blockchain, because the blockchain is a series of blocks where every transaction comes in and there is a period of time when a new block forms. And that that was a revolution, but it also has some limitations. And I couldn't help when I went here today to think, in light of what's happening today in the UK, I want to give you a little example. There's 140,000 customs officials in the European Union. They are here to enforce the borders and make sure that all the goods and the animals that comes into into the European Union are checked. Every year they detect around 37 million units that are not allowed in. These can be for different reasons. It could be weapons we don't want in. It could be dangerous goods, black plastic for our kitchens, utensils that is not that is harmful to us. It could be all kind of reasons. And when you start to think about that amount of data that has to go, and that has to be worked at to have frictionless borders, then you start to think about the amount of transactions that is actually needed to control this. And when you say Brexit, the Brexit team actually looked at, when they started all this, they had a team looking at, do we have a technology today and that could be an alternative to a physical border? E.g., do we have a technology today where we can actually register and trace all the goods, so we don't need a physical border, but you can trade goods everywhere, so you don't have this kind of thinking? And they concluded we don't have that technology today. So when we talk about distributed ledgers and not blockchain, the reason why we're going into that direction is really we need much higher number of transactions to even talk about that future. So when you have the blockchain and the classical blockchain, you have different ways where they try to work with the problem of number of transactions. So the technology that I present is actually fundamentally changing the protocol to say that this is not blocks of chains, a chain of blocks. These are transactions that comes in that will reference two other transactions that have been, and every new transaction comes in with reference two others, but not in blocks, but more in a web based. And therefore you have a whole other protocol that actually scales. What is interesting is that the blockchain has miners, and the miners are needed for the security. In these newer technologies, everybody contribute to the security, so you don't have fees any longer on using the technology for the transactions. So you have feeless transactions, but you contribute with your CPU power, you contribute with a little bit of energy for that. And that means that you can transfer funds, cost, everything for free, meaning you have feeless transactions. If you start to have feeless transactions, you have new business models. So non-blockchain distributed ledgers actually means that there's a lot more new technologies coming up, and I feel we just started one place. Then you have the decentralized, you have different versions of what is a non-blockchain distributed ledgers, and it all, at the core of it, is how centralized are the authority around the control of this ledger. And that's where you see, many technologies comes up because of the scalability. You try to solve that with the control and access on different levels.
Perfect. The clear advantages in terms of scalability, in terms of costs, of not being on the blockchain as a distributed ledger offering. So very well explained, yes. I think, Alex, what I wanted to ask you about, because often we use the term centralized, distributed, decentralized, and often it's kind of, people don't know the difference, especially between the last two, distributed, decentralized. So can you explain what these terms actually mean and how would you define them in an easy way?
Thank you so much for the great question. And I feel like DLT is kind of a misleading way of explaining what blockchain is, because it is a form of distributed ledger, but it's actually decentralized. So the terminology and the entire definition, I feel, is misleading a lot of people, and it's very different, actually. And the best way I can put it for you guys is centralized authorities is very much similar to the electric grid that you have over there. It's one point that controls everything. So it has great control, but it's also vulnerable to physical or virtual attacks. Then you have the distributed ledgers, which is you might have several electric grids within the same room, right? That have several point of authorities that can control and minimize the risk or attacks, because if one is attacked, it's distributed just like the internet has been built through military advancements. And then decentralized is like every single light in this room is interconnected. So it's very difficult, it's actually impossible as of today to actually hack it because it's completely decentralized and there's no single point of authority, which creates what we call the trustless protocol, which is behind the blockchain. And I'm not saying that blockchain is the best. There are pros and cons to everything. As you were saying, it depends on commission fees, on speed, transaction, throughput. There are many, many factors that we need to look into, but that's something that I really feel we need to clarify, and I explain to everyone, distributed is not decentralized, so it's good to separate the three.
Excellent. Maybe to stay with you, Alex, just when you introduced yourself, you talked about off-chain and on-chain technologies, and can you explain, number one, the difference, and number two, what are the advantages, of getting off-chain versus on-chain technologies, and how do you find the right balance between both?
That's a very tough question, but I would love to try at least, because obviously we've done lots of research. We're working with some of the biggest exchanges in the world, and this is what I can share with you guys from our experience in the past 9 months. There are multiple technologies that have worked in the past. Has anybody heard of FIX, Financial Information Exchange? Fidelity Group launched that, and it was a very, very cool protocol because they shared the same language. So if you're an institution, you're a broker-dealer, or you're a bank, everyone would have the same language, and that allowed real-time trading. So other than being on the phone all the time, you could actually have a system that allows you to trade real-time, and it creates tremendous liquidity, trillions and trillions of dollars on the NASDAQ alone. So even though the technology was born in 1992, it's still more powerful than what we have as of today. The problem is, with this type of technology, is it's not transparent. There are no APIs. So all the information, if you want information from the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, you have to pay for it. You have to reach out and actually buy it. So what crypto exchanges did very poorly was they moved to what we call the REST API. And they call themselves exchanges, but I see it more as an online shop, like an e-commerce. So they can support a limited amount of transactions, a limited amount of users. And so what the bigger exchanges like Binance and others started to realize is we need to create a WebSocket. So it went from FIX, REST API, which is definitely very limited, it's more like a shop, it's not an exchange, to WebSockets. And WebSockets are really cool because the integration through web services is a lot easier. Now, the issue that we have as of today is when you look at different APIs and SDKs is we have different languages. So the way it works, the problem about WebSocket, and it drives engineers crazy, is that because they have different languages, although the integration is easy, the communication is very difficult. You need quite a lot of work in terms of the setup. So it's kind of like, you're Binance, you may speak Chinese, you're Kraken, you speak English, you're another exchange, you speak French. So you need an interpreter in between all of these protocols. And that's why SDKs, which are being built as of today, and definitely within the best exchanges, are allowing us to have like an interpreter so that exchanges can communicate and share liquidity. And I feel like we're going in the right direction, but the main problem is we missed the earlier chances because people were not looking at FIX or other previously successful protocols and take little bits of ideas in here and there, and especially the standardization of the FIX protocol, which allowed the same language and easy transactions for liquidity. So I think we're evolving in the right direction, but we definitely, because of this get-rich-quick scheme of building poor quality exchanges, it really hurt us in the beginning, but it's going to be better in the future.
And maybe what's the solution for those exchanges to talk to each other? What are the domineering protocols which are now being established?
So as of now, it's really WebSocket. There are exchanges like Gemini. They're also building FIX because they want liquidity and they want institutions to connect to their exchange. But I really think the future will be WebSocket. I think that's the easiest, and if we can find some sort of standardization so that we can communicate within the protocols together, we can achieve a level of liquidity that we haven't achieved up to now.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
And talking about communication, I think now let's talk about globally communication, and not just between us as people, but let's talk about communication between objects, about the Internet of Things, where everything nowadays or in the future might have a digital wallet and might be able to pay You know, it scares me when I think about that my fridge at home would be able to purchase, you know, from the supermarket what we need as our family, what my children want to eat. But probably one day we will be at this stage, Jens, you know, where the fridge has got its own digital wallet, can order what our household needs, where the car has got their own digital wallet, can go, you know, and get gas whenever it needs more. So it will be a new world of the Internet of Things, and how do you see that, you know, because it's a new business models will emerge as a result of it.
Yeah. No, it is super interesting, and it's also something we are involved with. We're working with quite a number of companies, especially in mobility and the engineering. And you talked about utilities before in that sector, giving object and wallet, and they can then pay things with that wallet. And the examples here are especially we work with Daimler and BMW and others to install these wallets and test them out with the cars, because in the future with these atomic cars, you will have cars who drives around the cities. They will have to pay for their parking. They will have to pay toll, road toll, that's what it's called, and so on. And what is interesting is the frictionlessness of doing this, because when you give an object this wallet, and it connects to, let's say we have some POCs where it drives up, it parks, it measures the seconds, and it transfers the funds immediately, and there's no cost of this transfer. Today, every transfer of value, normally, I mean, we're in a space where that changes, but you know, you use your credit card. But when you have this instant transfer of a value, you fundamentally change the game, because it's not only actually transfer the value, but think about it. When I get up the car, I start to charge the electricity. I pay per kilowatt hour on the spot. So when I start to pay on the spot, or my car does, I don't, the car does. What happens is that I don't need a legal contract anymore, because the risk of will you pay me or not is out of the game. It's like me going down and buy chewing gum at the kiosk. I get it immediately, and we don't have a contract about me paying chewing gum. Today you have a lot of things where you actually have, you know, monthly rents, or you pay consolidated. But if you can start to chop that up, and you can pay per how you use things, you take a lot of overhead away. One thing is the legal contract, but the other things is if you start to think that in a broader perspective, and we talked about lights before, if you talk about light bulbs, let's say all of these bubbles would have their own wallet, which is not that strange a thought, because the technology is there to give them that. If they all have their own wallet, and they start to pay for the grid, well, then you will have multiple suppliers to the grid of energy. So I could program my bulbs to pay for different reasons. And you know, it could be what is the mix of green energy in my consumption. Then it has a smart contract saying I only buy that, or I would have the cheapest kilowatt hour. That's what I will buy. So what will happen if we go for that, because that's probably going to see a lot of us will have the cheapest, is that you have the whole drive towards the zero margin society would be much, much stronger, because utility companies, energy providers will start to launch products where they don't have contractual overheads. They don't do marketing, because there's no need for marketing, because I'm anyway going to buy the cheapest, or my bulb is going to be. So the whole business model will have to change of how do we do this. And I think that becomes super important when you go down to data, because data is the big discussion we have. The data, who has access for the data? Let's say you can pay a cent for the data my Rumba smart vacuum cleaner at home collects about the size of my house when it moves around. Maybe that's interesting for somebody. I can say, well, you know, if somebody asks for my data, I'll happy to, for 2 cents, give it away, and I can even anonymize it before, if I like to do that. So you can take control of all the data you have, and you can sell it per API or something like that in very, very small amounts. And when that could help open the silos, because then there is a corresponding business models.
Yeah.
To those small amount of data that we collect from everywhere. and you have a governance structure because you are selling, you have ownership and you can sell. So we are running a marketplace where companies at the moment are setting up smart sensors and trying to buy and sell from each other just to know how does it feel to buy and sell small smart sensors that has a wallet and buy and sell to each other. So I think that's it fundamentally is a very, very interesting perspective.
Yes, I mean I can imagine that even thinking about sensors having maybe their own P&L,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that comes back to the auditability again and the immutability of the transaction happen and so on. So you can actually have an audit trail. You would probably still want that kind of historical understanding of how smart businessman your center is.
What's your view on digital wallets and objects?
On objects, it's hard to say. To be honest, IoT is not my forte, but there is something that I do think is really important since we're talking about emerging technologies, guys, and I think this is the most critical step for building trust. Obviously, like blockchain and Bitcoin is seen as the trustless protocol, or everything is related around trust, right? Because technology removes the middleman. Humans have flaws. Technology is based on science. We have this relationship of trust. So what I really believe in terms of connecting emerging technologies, what we really need, and I'm really hoping we will get this in the near future, is connecting biometric artificial intelligence with smart contracts. Who here likes passwords? Please raise your hand. Everyone's falling asleep when I ask that question. Who here likes private keys? Raise your hand. Oh, wow, some people do love the private keys. We were talking about it a little bit earlier, but it's a headache. A private key is like a password times 1 million in terms of headaches and in nightmares, because if you lose your private key, it's like losing an entire bank account for some people. So it's very, very dangerous. In terms of the user experience, explaining a private key to my mom or my aunt or my little cousins, they're going to be like, what, a private key? So it's definitely something that is a big problem for mass adoption. So what if we could use biometric artificial intelligence, just like facial recognition, fingerprints, iris recognition, whatever we can do that will directly help us not have to have a private key. So just like you have with your phones, you don't need a password anymore. Your iPhones are getting much better. It can recognize your face. You don't need to remember a password, even though some people might not like iPhones. But it's definitely one direction that we really need. The private key is a huge problem. And then if that could connect to smart contracts, that's even better. Because if you have facial recognition, for instance, right? For example, KYC ML, if you're going on multiple exchanges, you're going through several platforms, you won't have to do it over and over. That's already awesome on top of private keys, right? So KYC ML is also included. But if you can have it in a smart contract, embed that digital ID in a smart contract and have the machine learning in some way interact with each other, then you can build trust among governments. Because at the end of the day, if we're a trustless protocol and there's no identification, the trust is limited. It's very limited. And the government will not trust you. Institutions will not trust you. Big corporations will not trust you, right? So for me, the most important thing at this point, out of all the technology, more than liquidity, more than anything else, is having digital ID and a biometric artificial intelligence connecting with smart contracts. So it truly is transparent and a trustless protocol. Yeah.
Wonderful, Alex.
Yeah.
It was an excellent summary as well for our panel. I've been told, we have to finish, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. But I would like to thank you very much, Alex and Jens, for your excellent contributions. And thank you all for joining us today. And I'm sure you can, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask us in the break. We can talk in more detail. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.